Welcome. We are going to be doing a lesson today on how to use a Pearson square. So first I want to start with a little bit of background. A Pearson square is a tool that we use in order to create a balanced ration. A balanced ration is important because it allows us to create a feed comprised of many different feedstuffs that supply an animal with the right amount of various nutrients in order to maintain a healthy diet so that they can do work for us, grow, provide food for their offspring, etc. So this tool is going to use some of the information from the feedstuffs chart that you had a previous lesson on, and it's going to expand from there. There are 8 simple steps that we use in order to create a balanced ration. You also have an outline of those steps in Google Classroom. It should look pretty similar to what you see on the screen right now, except that it's a handout or a worksheet. We're going to go through each one of these steps together today to guide you through the process. So you will need that information. If you can print it, awesome. If not, you can just do it on a separate sheet of paper. It's not a big deal. And then you're also going to need this document right here, the feed composition chart. We'll be toggling through both of those today, so also be patient with Ms. Chaudhry. All right, so to do a Pearson square, the very first thing that we start with is step number 1. So step number 1 says to determine the desired amount of the nutrient and place this number in the center of the square. What that means is it's saying choose what nutrient we are trying to feed for, so protein or dry matter or calcium, and then whatever percent you want to feed to, that's going to go in the middle of a box. So I'm going to draw a box to start. Normally, when you're working with Pearson squares, you're going to know what number goes in the center based on what your animal needs. For our sake, for class, I will usually give you that. That's part of the problem I'm asking you to solve, so you just need to read that problem to find that information. Today, we're going to say that we're going to feed for 18% protein. I'm just going to put that in the middle to kind of help me remember. So that's step number 1. Okay, we've done that. We've determined the desired amount of the nutrient, which is 18%, and protein, and we've put that into the center of our box. Step 2, I'm going to switch colors just to kind of help keep us on track. Step 2 says to select the feedstuffs you will be adding, write their nutrient value in the left corners of the square. So the next step involves us looking at what ingredients am I going to use to get a food that is 18% protein for my animal. There's one super important rule about this, and that is that whatever feedstuffs you use, one needs to be above this 18% and one needs to be below. And that's important because the whole goal of this process is balancing 2 ingredients to get something in the middle. So if you don't have one that's higher and one that's lower, you can't get them to balance to some midpoint. So again, we're going to go for 18% protein for our example. So I have lots of different feedstuffs I can use. Oftentimes I'm going to give you in your problem which ones that I'd like you to use, but today I think we're just going to some easy ones. So I think we'll start with let's do one below, and let's do corn silage. So corn silage is 8. So I'm going to go back to my document. I'm going to put in a CS to help me know that that's corn silage, and I'm going to put an 8 in that top corner. So that's my one below, which means that whatever other nutrient I pick, it has to have a protein value of above 18%. So I go back to this chart, and again, I'm using protein, so I'm using this box right here, this column. CP is our crude protein. So now I've got to find one that's above 18 to offset or balance out with the one I just selected. So I think we're going to do whole cottonseed meal right here. This one has a protein value or crude protein value of 23%. So I'm going to go back to my document. I have whole cotton seed meal, and then 23%. Okay, so that's step number 2. I've selected the feed stuffs I'm going to use, corn silage and whole cottonseed meal, and then I've written in their nutrient values, one in each of the left-hand corners, as you can see right here. Okay, so the next step we're going to do is also really easy. It says to cut your square. And cutting your square is just a way of helping to guide how you're going to do your math as you work through this problem. So it literally involves drawing some lines inside the center of your box. So for step 3, what I want to do is put arrows through my box that go from one corner and point to the corner diagonal to it, or the opposite corner. So my 23 is going to go from the bottom left up to the top right, and my 8 is going to go from my top left to my bottom right. That's step 3, cutting your square. Step 4 says add labels to the right-hand side. So when we solve out, our labels are going to move straight across. So I'm starting with percentages on the left-hand side, and I'm going to equalize those percentages out to parts of the total mixture. So on the left-hand top side, it's going to be how many parts of my whole are going to be corn silage. And on the bottom right, it's going to be how many parts of my whole are whole cotton seed meal. Again, the goal of a Pearson square is to balance out your 2 ingredients so that you know how much of each is going to let you get to that middle nutrient value. In this case, that middle 18%. And we do that by parts because that means that it doesn't matter how big the parts are. If I need to make enough food for one animal, I might use that many cups of each ingredient. But if I'm making that much food for 100 animals, that might be wheelbarrows full, or it might be a truckload. And that allows us the flexibility to change that depending on how much we want to make. But the balance or the ratio between them is always going to be the same. So that's step number 4. Again, it's really important in this step that we're making sure that our labels move straight across. So corn silage here to corn silage here, whole cottonseed meal here to whole cottonseed meal here. That is probably one of the biggest mistakes that students make in this process. Okay. Next, we go to step number 5. Step number 5 says that we're going to subtract diagonally smallest number from largest to get the number of parts of each feed stuff. Okay. So what does that mean? Okay, it means that we need to follow these arrows that we put in step number 3. So first, let's go ahead and change my color to a nice purple over here. Excuse me. We're going to subtract diagonally. So I'm going to start with my 8 up at the top. 8 minus 18, or 18 minus 8, is going to give me 10. Okay, so I'm taking that number in the upper left. I'm subtracting it from the 18 because it's bigger. And then I'm going to cross that number over to the opposite corner. I'm following those arrows that I put in step number 3. This is how the balancing of these 2 ingredients to get to a middle happens. So do the same thing over with my whole cottonseed meal. I'm going to take my 23. I'm going to subtract 18, which is going to give me 5, and it's going to go to that diagonal corner, which is going to give me 5 parts of the corn silage. Okay, so that's our step number 5. Okay, we're balancing out these 2 ingredients. So the big things to always remember is your labels go straight across, but your math is going to move diagonally, and that's how we create that balance. All right, we're going to move this really quickly so that we can keep following our directions. Okay. Step number 6 says that we need to add the parts of each feedstuff to get total parts in our ration. Let's switch up some colors again. We'll do this kind of teal. Okay. So step 6 then, we're going to add 5 parts of corn silage and 10 parts of whole cottonseed meal to get 15 total parts in this recipe. I mentioned in one of our previous videos that when you look at all of the feedstuffs, you can think of them as ingredients. And this right now is really the process by which we build the recipe for mixing up that food that we're making for our animal, or really that feed. Okay, so step number 6, second off the list, we have added the parts of each feedstuff to get the total parts of the ration. Let's go ahead and switch some colors again. We'll go for a nice Hartford Oriole orange. I think actually this one would be a little better. All right, so we want to move to step number 7. Step number 7 says that we need to divide the number of parts for each feedstuff by the total number of parts to get our percent for each feedstuff. So I'm going to move this information over here. I have my corn silage and I have my whole cottonseed meal. Okay? So for corn silage, I have listed that I have 5 parts. So I have 5 parts of this ingredient out of 15 parts total. If I divide those, I've got my handy dandy cellular device. That was a great time for using that. That's going to give me an answer of 0.333 forever. I generally recommend that you go 3 places past the decimal point to get a relatively approximate answer. Doesn't have to be perfect, but when you're dealing with smaller amounts, rounding those off too soon can really affect your overall recipe. If you're using a big recipe, it's not as big a deal, but in a small recipe, if you're just making something for one animal, it can make a big difference. So generally 3 past the decimal place. That's going to give me the percent for my corn silage. Now, if I ask you for the percent value, what you would then want to do is multiply by 100, which is going to give me 33.3% corn silage. Okay. If I go to my whole cottonseed meal, I have 10 parts out of 15 total parts. I do my math on that, again, with my handy dandy calculator, or you might be able to draw some assumptions based on what your first answer was. That's going to give me 0.66, and that 6 is going to go on for a while, so I'm actually going to round to 0.667. Again, if I wanted the percent, I would multiply that by 100 to give me 66.7%. Right, depending on what I'm asking you to solve for in the equation, or what information that we need. Okay, so that's step number 7. It's all really simple math through this whole process. It's just a matter of making sure that you follow the process correctly, and that's why the steps are really there, broken down really simply to help you work your way through that. Okay. So I think we're ready to tackle step number 8. We're going to switch our marker color one more time. And I think we're going to go ahead and go back to black just because we only use it for our fox in the center. Hopefully we'll get confused about. So the last step says that to determine the overall weight of each feedstuff in the feed, because that's usually how we mix feeds is by weight, depending on how many animals we need to feed, we're going to multiply the weight of the feed by each feedstuff's percent in that decimal form. Okay, so if I do my corn silage, I have that as a 0.333. I'm going to multiply that by how much feed I want to create. This is something else that I would give you in a problem, and in our next video, you'll get that in a problem to see an example. So let's say that I wanted to make 250 pounds of feed. Okay, so I'm going to multiply that 0.33 by 250. I think there might have been another 3 in there. So when I multiply that, I get 83.25. It is really important to include your labels. So I'm going to put in LBS for pounds, and I'm also going to make sure that I put CS for corn silage. That's how many pounds of my overall ingredient are going to be corn silage. Move that really quick. Give us a little bit more space. All right, so I know my corn silage amount for my recipe. Now I also need my whole cotton seed meal. Okay, so I've got for that one 0.667. I also multiply that by the 250 pounds we decided we needed to make. That's going to give me an answer of 0.667 on my phone times 250 is going to give me 166.75. And again, with my labels, I want to put LBS, and then I'm going to put in my whole cotton seed meal abbreviation so that I cover that information as well. So at this point, I figured out how to make a recipe, how to make a ration or a TMR, a total mixed ration, using corn silage and whole cottonseed meal that contains 18% protein, because for the animals that I'm feeding, that is the ideal amount we need. It's going to take me 83.25 pounds of corn silage. It's going to take me 166.75 pounds of whole cottonseed meal. One good way to check for math errors at this point is to add this number and this number, and if they don't reach approximately the weight that you were shooting for, which in this case was 250 pounds, you've made a mistake. Now, depending on how you rounded these numbers, they might be a little off, but they should be pretty close, within a couple of pounds if it's a large recipe, or within a part of a pound if it's a small recipe. So that's how we use the Pearson square. Tomorrow, we're going to have some practice problems on that I'm going to go through, just to kind of get us practicing and thinking about that. So tune in to your next lesson whenever you're ready to go through that. If you need to go through this video again, watch it again. That's fine. That's what we're here for. So good luck. If you have questions, please send me or Ms. Strupp, whoever is your animal science teacher, an email, and we'll be more than glad to help you. But this is how to use a Pearson square to create a balanced ration. Good luck, guys.